Hi everyone, Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby here with Wes Ball, the director of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. And this franchise has gone on. There's three recent very successful films already by the time, you inherited
Yeah.
this fourth one.
Well,
So I'm
there's
cu
more than that before that.
yeah, with many more, but the recent trilogy
Sure.
was out just before yours. And I'm curious, when you did get a hold of this, what was kind of your way into this world since it's already been established? What was like the stamp you felt like you could make on it?
Yeah, I've told the story a few times, but when I was first asked about it, it was like, what would you do with the next Planet of the Apes? And my initial instinct was to avoid it, to not go there, because I was a big fan of the previous three movies, and I'd gotten to know Matt Reeves, who directed the last two. I got to know him on our Mouse Guard project that got kind of that failed ultimately. Um, so I wasn't sure, like, do you need another one, and and it was about a week later that I had an idea, like, oh, I know how you can do this. We need to sort of, let's call it a soft reboot. You know what I mean? Um, you had to kind of start a new chapter so that they can get, more movies out of this thing. It's an important franchise for the studio, of course. But at the same time, I didn't want to like abandon all that goodwill and all that amazing story stuff that had happened with the Caesar character in the last the trilogy movies, right? But at the same time, I had grown up on the original Planet of the Apes, the Charlton Heston movie. So I started thinking about it as, is there a way to kind of almost bridge those two worlds together, where you could start that step, that march towards that Charlton Heston reality essentially, but you come from the previous Caesar trilogy, right? And so that's where that basically that idea of the 300-year cut essentially, came into place, where like, oh, it lets us kind of reset the movie. We can change tones, we can change whole new characters. It's a bold kind of swing, of course, but at the same time, the foundation of it is built on this idea of who Caesar was and what he meant to the apes, and that kind of legend, that idea of how an ape kind of became a legend, became a myth, that became this awesome kind of stuff that we got to kind of explore throughout the movie. So the spirit of Caesar kind of hangs over the movie, but at the same time, we got to do kind of, we got to like kind of do our own thing. So that was kind of the way in, and it just felt like there's a lot of promise there. And so, went to the studio, kind of pitched it to them, and ultimately met Rick and Amanda, the writers and producers of the previous three movies. Kind of pitched them this version, and they kind of said, "Well, that's kind of cool. Let's run with this." And they had suggested Josh Friedman, the writer, who they had worked with on all the Avatar movies that they had just finished together. And so, kind of did the same thing. Went out to dinner with Josh, kind of pitched him this crazy version, and he kind of came back to me and said, "Oh, you want to do a Kurosawa movie, with an apes?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay, yeah, maybe." It's kind of a Western thing almost. And so that was the start of it. And then we off to the races, and then the pandemic hit, and then it's just been like obstacle after obstacle trying to get this movie made. But the faith in it, I think, from all our partners in the studio and everything, has just been great. And yeah, so far so good.
Yeah. Well, I love the opening of the movie is so great because I think it establishes that kind of big swing you're taking right off the bat, this
Sure.
jump.
Yeah.
And I love, it's when they're going up to find the egg, the big climb to
Yeah.
get the
That was like
egg.
one of the first ideas that popped up in my head when I
Really?
when I was thinking about this idea. I was like, oh, that would be cool to like to find these group of characters in a world that we can almost barely recognize, the remains of our world, right? It's that much farther in the future. We never really say how much farther in the future, so it's kind of up to the audience to kind of decide for themselves. But it's long enough that that this myth can form, and then to meet our characters on this kind of coming of age ritualistic kind of you know uh rite of passage, seems so cool, and it kind of sets off immediately this kind of younger almost adventure that we're going on. I thought it was fun. It was really cool.
Yeah. And that the apes, just like the humans do, develop their own rituals and culture
Yeah.
around things, which is
Yeah,
great.
very much like,
Yeah.
that was very much kind of the original thinking of this ape storyline was, you know, like our species, how we marched through these different eras, of our species, of our civilizations and stuff. The apes do the same thing. And so there's like 2,000 years between, almost between like the Caesar trilogy and the Charlton Heston reality. And like you can imagine all the different levels that apes would kind of make their way through, and some would die out, and some would be reborn, and all these different things. This amazing kind of evolution, of
Hmm.
the sort of ape kind. You know what I mean? But at the same time, they get to leapfrog based off of what we left behind, right? All the secrets, all the technology, all the knowledge that some has been lost and will be refound. It seemed like it was a great, like foundation for just a bunch of really fun stuff that hopefully we can continue exploring in the future. You know what I mean? It's really exciting stuff.
Absolutely. I wanted to talk about kind of working with actors in this kind of film because, I know Andy Serkis came in and did a little like workshop, ape
Yeah,
workshop with some of
yeah.
them, but you know, all the actors
He
who are
was a
playing
friend
apes
of the
there,
court, I would say, Andy.
yeah, they're all wearing these motion capture suits, so that immediately is something quite different from a normal shoot, right? So does that change the way you kind of approach a scene with them, have to talk to them through a scene or direct them through a scene?
Not really, to be honest. I mean, at the end of the day, by the time we're rolling with the cameras, all the actors have gone through weeks and weeks of this ape training. You know what I mean? And we picked actors who um, would embrace this very strange form of making a movie, right? This is not for just any actor. It is not. Some people just do not want to. They need the costume. They need the reality to kind of immerse themselves in this world. There's some actors that Andy Serkis is one of them who can just see everything in their head and they can imagine it. And they can just forget all this technology that they're wearing and just immerse themselves in this character. And it becomes very much like theater in that way, right? A lot of actors describe it that way. And so the first step was just finding the right actors that were up to the challenge, right? And what's interesting about all these actors, none of them had really done mocap before, So whereas Andy Serkis kind of invented the whole kind of the technique, I guess, behind driving these amazing performances that artists that were it's a really handshake between the artist who the visual effects artist and the actor who drives it, right? So it's this really interesting kind of collaboration of how you kind of pull this stuff off. But the actors, they kind of totally immerse themselves in this world and like really internalize this ape thing for themselves, right? And they all kind of have their own different styles and vibes and like how they hold themselves in their body. And that was a hugely important part of the process, this prep process. By the time we're rolling the cameras, it's like they'd gone through it. They felt like it was putting on old shoes. You know what I mean? It felt really comfortable for them, other than just the pressure of, oh my God, we're doing an Apes movie. You know what I mean? And then the technique of just bringing all these cameras and all this technology out into the wild. You know what I mean? And where do you hide all these cameras and all the stuff that just is not typical for a typical live action movie, right? There's that technical challenge of it all. But for the most part, while we're shooting, we're just in it. We're just trying to make a good story and do a good performance, And then one of the bigger challenges really is for me in post when I'm trying to choose the selects, and choose the actors and try to imagine what they're going to look like as an ape. Because it's one thing to kind of watch an actor who's got this camera covering his face half the time, and judge on performance. But it's another thing to like pacing, like when you're used to an actor, you're looking to his eyes, you tend to cut a little faster. But like when there's an ape on camera, sometimes I found myself, oh wow, we cut out too quick. I need a chance to just like just immerse myself into this impossibility of an ape talking on screen. You know what I mean? So it changes things a lot, and the choices that you make in post, because it's like a year and change of time there when you're editing this movie, and you have to make these choices based on something you can't see for about 6 or 7 months. So there's this long kind of leap of faith essentially that I'm making this choice now on when to cut this shot and when to do this shot, because you can't afford to mess with it later after it goes through this incredibly long, tedious process with all the artists at Weta and Eric's team, Eric Winkler's team, our VFX supervisor, to convert this incredible work by the actors into these images that are completely synthetic. You know what I mean? So it's a bizarre process for making a movie, but it once you learn it, I feel like I learned it right by the end of the movie. Like, oh, now I know how to make these movies. You know what I mean? But then it was time to turn the movie over. But it was an incredibly fun challenge, both creatively and technically. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Your description of kind of getting lost in their faces is reminding me of one of my favorite shots in it is when Noah is looking up through that telescope, and
Hmm.
he just is struck by something in the sky. We
Yeah.
never see what it is, but we just like linger on his face the
A
whole time, which is
controversial
great.
choice, I will say.
Was there any like discussion, or is there like a canon for yourself over what that is that he's
Oh
seeing?
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, there was many debates, but I didn't there was nothing I could show that I felt was stronger than the audience's imagination, you know, thinking about what he was seeing. You know what I mean? And what was getting that reaction out of his eyeball, twitching around. I feel like you got the important thing, which was his mind was being blown by what he saw. That was the important idea. You know what I mean? So I felt like showing something, it felt wrong. But there are clues out there for what he might have saw.
We'll put it together.
Yeah.
But it's nice to wonder, I think.
Yeah, I don't
Um,
know. I feel like it was stronger that way, to let the audience
mhm.
determine for themselves what he saw. And in a way, it's not important what he saw. It's more about his mind in that moment is awakening to ideas that are way bigger than himself. You know what I mean? And those are just seeds that are being planted for, hopefully, again, if we're lucky enough, to continue to explore in future movies. You know what I mean? Like profound ideas here that we'll get to kind of explore. It's fun.
Yeah, and for all of the kind of immense amount of digital effects and the unconventionalness of, motion capture suits, you did use a lot of actual locations and practical set pieces.
Yeah.
What is the planning process like in that in terms of like, well, do I have to convince everyone to like plop a bunch of the budget in on a practical set, or like where do I go practical versus digital? What is
Sure.
that process like?
Yeah, I mean, these movies are always, constrained by the budgets. It's just the truth. We had to make this thing cheaper than the previous movies in a big way. So that was a win on that, just the execution front. We also had whole new characters to design. A lot more worlds to visit this time, right? That was kind of an important thing, I think, for this movie, is that we got to open it up and see these different cultures, these different worlds, the Eagle Clan, the Proximus camp, the journey along the way. This ancient airport that's been overgrown has become like this almost temple, this ancient kind of ruins that rocket explorers. Lots of really cool, like imaginative worlds to visit on this adventure, which was really fun. But you know, there's something about going out in real location that just it inspires everyone, from the actors to the cameraman. You know what I mean? That it just there's something real and tangible about it. Um, that kind of that energy sort of shows up in the frame somehow. You know what I mean? And it also keeps the VFX honest. We have something in frame that's real, and maybe it's a little bit because we use these old lenses from the 70s, that maybe it needs to be a little less clean than you actually think coming out of the computer when it's perfect pixels. It reminds us that when you're out there in the wild and some stuff gets on the lens, or you got some dirt in your fingernails, it changes the kind of vibe of the movie. You know what I mean? So we worked really hard to make sure that it felt very realistic, and it felt handmade in some way. But with that said, there's still about 30-35 minutes of full CG in the movie, where every tree and every blade of grass and every leaf is CG. Like that opening sequence you're talking about, the egg climb, that's all CG. That's full CG except for the opening shot, right? So finding that balance to figure out how to convince people this was really happening, to never let up on that illusion, right? Not just talking apes, but the world that they exist in. You know what I mean? So it was a really fun challenge to figure out how to pull that off.
Yeah. Um, I feel like between this film and, the Maze Runner trilogy, you have this
Mhm.
dystopian, decaying, post-apocalyptic vibe
Yeah,
really
and then my short
locked
before that,
down.
Ruin, which really got me
Yeah.
started, right?
Yeah. What is it about that kind of setting and that world that really draws you in? What is
Well, I'll
the
say this:
the
it's
storytelling?
nothing I planned on. It's not like I must do all post-apocalyptic. You know, it just kind of happened. Like the Maze Runner thing, I had done this Ruin short, right? That it kind of was very much that overgrown stuff like that. And then that led me to the studio at Fox, who said, "Hey, look at this Maze Runner." They kind of maybe saw there's some similarities there, so that kind of led itself to there. And then the books themselves take place in this post-apocalyptic Earth, and so I had to achieve that in a very different kind of way. And then I go off and do this mouse guard project, which was very much was not that. And then that kind of fell apart. And then here comes Apes. And then of course, okay, put back to post-apocalyptic thing. You know what I mean? So it wasn't anything planned. It was just kind of what was kind of, presented to me and all that stuff. But with that said, I do find something perhaps morbidly like fascinating about the kind of big reset, like the busyness of our world and the chaotic kind of quality of our world. The ideas of kind of, stopping everything and letting time take over and nature take over. It's I'm not the only one, of course. There's a huge subgenre of just this stuff. Last of Us being one of them. That there's something we find fascinating in going back to a simpler time, and imagining our world, how fragile it is, built on technology and all this modern stuff, how how fleeting that could be. You know what I mean? So there's something interesting about it, and certainly happy to continue playing around in those worlds.
Well, you will get to take a little bit of a break from it, I know, because you were signed on for the Legend of Zelda film, which is, I
Indeed.
think, another franchise that people
Just a
love,
little bit of
and
expectations there.
there's a
Yeah.
little bit of pressure for you, just a little bit there.
I thought Apes had expectations set, but like, oh my God, yeah, Zelda is like something on a whole nother level. Yeah, I can't really say much about it, but except that, I played it since I was a little kid. I grew up in the 80s, so I've been there from the beginning. And this has been a long journey, and I will do everything in my power to make sure it is as special as the 12 and 14-year-old kid who grew up playing these games wants it to be. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Well, we look forward to seeing that, and anywhere else that the Apes franchise will take you. So,
Yeah, indeed.
thank you so much, Wes, for joining me, and everyone watching. Stick with Gold Derby the rest of this season. Thank you.
Thanks.